afternoon. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. This is our last professional development session of the semester. We'll be back in the spring with a wonderful slate of events that we'll be publicizing at a later time. But for now, this is our last one. So Wednesdays at noon over Zoom, that's going to continue in the spring. And today we have a chat. For those of you who haven't been here before, a chat is kind of an open space for us to discuss whatever we want to discuss. I have a list of topics that I'm always kind of curious about picking people's brains on and all of that, if people don't have things. But before I kind of get to some of the things that I want to kind of talk about, I was wondering, does anyone have any questions, issues, or topics that they would like to discuss? And you can, if you drop in the chat, I'll read it for you. If you're not an opportunity to kind of unmute yourself, but definitely if you are comfortable to unmute yourself and use your voice, you can do that too.
I'm wondering, I was reading this morning about how students and maybe also professionals just more generally, that people just aren't engaging with work and school like they did in pre-pandemic times, which is something that some of my colleagues and I have kind of been observing just in like the events that we hold, the things that we've been like, we just aren't seeing the kind of engagement that we were seeing before. And so I don't have any specific question, but I'm just wondering like kind of what people's experiences are, what we think is going on, and like, what can we do, not necessarily to like make people engage more, but like what can we do to meet students where they're at right now?
Andy, can I jump onto that question, because it's I don't have an answer, and I think that's a great question, but how do I put this? Here's in my graduate class, I felt like I was able to go back to pre-pandemic methods, techniques, and just best class I ever had. Like, they're just super smart, super engaged. And it wasn't just me, it was them, and they were all ready. In my first year class, I felt as if every time I went in there with hoping for kind of large group engagement, with, awesome mini lecture followed by exciting discussion questions, they just stared at me. And I had to, and when I went in there with highly structured classroom activities that required them to engage, they did great. They did just fine, but I had to like spell it out, and that it was, so that's not where I'm going with this yet. I had a graduate student observing me for maybe a third of the class. And when I shared with him what was going on and how like I had to come up with these activities that virtually required them to participate and engage, he was horrified at me, because he was like, well, what if your students don't want to participate, right? What kind of pressure is that on them? That's not fair. I would be embarrassed if I was in a class like that. I don't like that kind of pressure. And this, maybe this is a pre-pandemic, Greg, was like, well, I don't know how else students learn in class if they're not engaged, right? If they don't participate, I don't think students who just sit there and take it in learn as well as those students that participate. So I feel like I'm in Andy, this is my question. Your question is my question. And I feel like it's at an existential crisis level, because if all my students from here on out are going to be like my first year students, where they won't participate unless they're in a structured environment that requires them to participate, where if I just go in there and say voluntarily talk, they won't. What do I do? So yeah. Your question is my question, Andy.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I will say that I've had a very similar experience. My grad class has been fantastic this semester. My undergrad class has been a lot more like I've kind of felt like I just don't think that they're just not that into me. But then I recently did like an end of the semester, like final self-reflection. And ask them like, what are the things about this class that you thought were good? What are improvements you have, suggestions you have for me for the future? And so many of the students were like, I loved this class. It was so great. And I was like, really? Like, that is not the impression that I was getting in class. So trying to figure out kind of like what this new generation of students, what their needs are, like how to appropriately push them in a way that is going to like support them and help them to learn through engagement, but not push them too much, and be respectful of their boundaries as well. So I don't know. Other
I was gonna say, this is an issue I'm having in my classes, but I was just talking to someone last night. Our department's trying to do socials for our students where they just can network with each other, because we have like a lot of students who major in management and we can't get them to come to socials. And I was like, I think it's because we don't require it. Like all of the other clubs require that you come to the club meetings and the activities to do stuff. And I'm like, how do we get people to do things without requiring it? They should want to meet other people, because that's what they've complained about. They don't have a way to meet people or talk to them outside of class. And I'm like, you have to take some initiative, but we don't know how to get them to engage in even that, let alone, I also have the same issues with the classrooms. Like you were talking about, Gregory, with the, we have discussion questions and it's crickets. Even when I try to change this questions around or ask a specific, oh, well, if you didn't like this, why didn't you like it? Or something like that, just trying to engage them in any kind of conversation at all at that point.
Is it possible that we're just still seeing the effects of the passive learning that they had for the last few years of high school, and they have to learn how to re-engage, which is why we're seeing the graduate students more, because they had that all through high school, the engagement and the activity and the, oh, I speak up in class and this is a conversation, as opposed to screen off and I'm watching.
Sarah, that's my initial knee-jerk response too, but I'll be kind of honest, because optimistically, then it's going to go away. That problem's going to go away if that's what we're seeing. And then it makes it easy. We just have to kind of ride this out. But I think Sarah is raising an interesting point here, is that maybe what we've got to do is we've got to teach them how to engage and why they should. One of the things, if, a couple of students in here have taken my Principles of College Teaching courses, I talk about being explicit in my teaching practices and why, right? So why we're having you do stuff, why this is going to be helpful for you learning the things that you want me to teach and learn with you. So kind of saying, if you want to achieve these student learning outcomes, well, then this is the best way that we're going to do it. So I'm kind of hoping that, Greg, you've had, your worst class, which I'm sure is still more fantastic than many other classes that many of us have taught. But maybe that will actually be your worst class. Next year, it'll automatically be better as we're starting to come out of this. One of the things I do recommend, though, is that if it's going to be important that your students engage, let them know that first day. So your graduate student who is kind of shocked, like, why would you expect that? Well, maybe because you told them on the first day, that's why they should expect that. Like literally in my Principles of College Teaching class, the first SLO, and I'll call on Noah. What's my first SLO in my Principles of College Teaching class?
Use your voice.
Use your voice. And it's something where this means that, you're training to be a college professor. You're training to be the person in the front of the class. You're going to need to learn to use your voice. So that means that if you're really kind of, genuine about developing those skills, you're going to talk in every class. That's just going to be part of it. And let them know that this is first and foremost one of the things we want you to do. So when I think of like my CAT community class or something like that, like communication, is one of the student learning outcomes that we have. So letting them know on that first day and throughout, hey, you communicating orally, you paying attention, you sharing your thoughts. These are things that are expected, and you've signed up for the course to develop those skills. So I do think sometimes active learning fails because students either didn't expect it or weren't trained to do it. One of our videos last week that we put out was ways to do active learning well. And I think one of the issues that I've seen when people aren't having active learning do it well, it's when it's like a special thing. So it's not something to do all the time. It's not something that is infused in every class. It's 3 months into the semester, someone tries to have a discussion for the first time and the students won't discuss. So I think there needs to become some foundation kind of put there. And I'm also a fan of when the students aren't talking, let's talk about why they're not talking. I'll be like, hey, I put out a question I thought would be interesting. People aren't responding. Is it just the stress of life? Or is there something about my phrasing of the question? Do you not feel safe today? What's going on? that's kind of leading to why people aren't engaging today. So I will talk about the elephant in the room in those kind of situations. And I like to think that at the point of doing this, I have enough rapport to have that conversation. And Clarissa is talking about a study. Clarissa, would you be willing to share kind of like a 30-second summary of what that study is you dropped in the chat?
Yeah, I think, I can't remember exactly which kind of classroom. I think it was like biology or physics. So they had two classrooms. One was like traditional lecture where students took notes, and the other was active learning where students were trying to figure out the content during class. And they asked students two different kinds of questions. First, do you feel like you learned more? And then the second was actually a test of their knowledge during the semester. And I think even after that semester. And what they found was that students felt like they learned more when they lectured and took notes, but they actually learned more when they were having to actively engage with the material, and it was really difficult for them. So the feeling and the actual learning were two different things. And I think pointing that out to students might be really helpful for them.
That's really good, because that's the same with language learning. Students feel like they're learning a lot when they memorize grammar paradigms, and when they memorize grammar lists, they feel like they're learning a lot, but that actually slows down their acquisition process. And so like, that's something that I tell them directly, that like, that's the way that this works. Like, you may not feel like you're accomplishing as much because you can't check off how many vocabulary words you have learned, but you're actually able to use the language better. And so I think that that's great to be able to connect it to just learning more generally and be explicit with like, this is why we're doing this.
Clarissa, that article looks great. Noah, download that for next semester for our class. That is fantastic.
Please and thank you.
I think that there are two human truths I teach about when I teach my psychology classes, and that's people are lazy and people want to feel good. And the issue with active learning is it kind of works against that first one, right? It takes work, it takes energy, it takes investment. And it kind of goes against the stereotypes of that teaching and learning dynamic, right? A lot of people have that stereotype. I pay to listen to the expert in front of the room, share their opinions. I don't want to share mine, and I don't want to hear my colleagues. So I think there's some PR, that we can kind of do some PR work we can do on this. And Clarissa, I love that we can do this from kind of a pedagogical, empirical data level and kind of making that case. But I think getting our students into a position where they sort of recognize at least the why. Maybe they don't always agree with the why, but at least they understand there is a why. And if we don't have a why, maybe we don't need to do that. I think that's another thing we get to kind of think about is if we've made an arbitrary decision to do something and students push back on it, maybe we shouldn't have done that. But, if I was Greg, I'm giving my graduate student giving me that feedback, an active learning lecture, which is kind of ironic, right? That I give the active learning lecture at that point, but that's probably what I would have fallen back on about this is the why that we're doing these kind of things. And this is why I'm dismayed, because I would have been dismayed as well. I'm hoping that we're kind of in a transition, right? I think we're in a transition back to helping our students kind of be college students in a way that they can kind of embrace and collaborate in their own learning. I also think December is the wrong time to kind of evaluate where our students are, right? It's kind of interesting. I was having this conversation about T-Vals yesterday in my class. It might be the wrong time, to kind of see where learning is. But I think a lot of our students are just kind of, as we mentioned, just try to limp to that finish line at this point. And the spring will be a new time. Spring always is a little bit more optimistic for me because we end with sunshine and warmth rather than kind of with the gray and the cold. So I've always kind of found that build toward the end of the spring semester, but yeah,
And
we'll get there.
another, oh, sorry.
Oh, please, Beth, go.
No, another thing I was thinking about is, you talked about like setting that up at the beginning, creating those norms together as a class, as to what participation is, what it looks like, what it feels like, all of that, I think, is also an important component of what we do. And as part of the inclusive teaching book study. So there's actually a section in one of the later chapters that discusses that whole idea of creating those norms together. And I think you could think about like, what does this look like in my classroom? What would participation look like? What would it look like to be an active listener versus, whatever it is? What will learning feel like? And what will your role be in it? And I think if you're doing that together, then that may set the stage, maybe for them to know that, this isn't going to be, I'm going to sit, and be passive in this class. That might set the stage for that too.
Yeah, I think having them collaborate on those norms and invest in those norms is a great thing to do. That's awesome, Beth. So I'm kind of wondering, as we're kind of talking about the levels of engagement our students did or didn't have over the course of the semester. However the semester went, we're about to conclude, right? So this is our last week of classes. Next week is finals week. Grades are due shortly after that. I'm kind of wondering what people are doing to kind of have their course, their material, the skills that they've built continue beyond the end of this week and next week. So I'm kind of curious about what people are doing to help their students have, like I use something called homework for life. So kind of thinking like the stuff you're learning for my class is not just for now, it's forever. And I'm kind of wondering how people are kind of rocking that last week, rocking that last day, and getting that information to resonate with their students beyond the, let me cram in as much as I can, put it on the final exam or in the final project, and then completely purge that from my consciousness. So I'm curious what people are doing.
I always like to, I start first day of class by actually reading the objectives in the syllabus out loud to the students and saying that this is what we're planning to do. And so I end the semester always reading through those objectives again and giving students an opportunity to talk about, one, do you think that we achieved each objective? And then two, what are the things that we did in class to get there? And three, how are you going to use this going forward? And so that's something that the students, it's really fun for me too, because there's all this stuff that they'll bring up that I'll be like, oh my gosh, I forgot we even did that. But it's a nice way to kind of connect beginning and end of the semester and have them see that like, oh, yeah, we were busy this semester.
To your point about them being these things that you kind of forgot you even covered, one of the things I do on the last day of all of my classes is we do the top 10 things that they learned. So they usually do it in a group of 2 or 3. And it's amazing to me that some of the things that show up on their list, the most, fundamental things or inspiring things that they learned over the course of the semester was like a tangent moment that we didn't necessarily even like spend time. Like maybe I wrote a word on the board, but it was maybe a story that someone told or something like that. And oftentimes that will change and I'll spend more times intentionally that next semester of including that point. So it's always kind of wonderful to see what hits our students because it's not always what we think. Andy, someone had asked you to repeat those questions. I wonder if you're willing to drop those in the chat for us. Perfect.
So I do something kind of similar with as Andy. Mine is more of an overarching course question. And of course, I teach pre-service teachers. And so the question is, how will you foster curiosity and wonder in children through science instruction? And I tell them that, like over the course of the semester, this is going to be the question that they have to be able to answer at the end of the semester. And ultimately they answer it on their final reflective project. And so we came back around to that today in class, and they're like, they were like, oh yeah, I'd totally forgotten, like, even though every week we have a focus question that helps to align with that and helps them think about that. So we spent some time really talking about what is their personal philosophy statement now or thinking about science instruction, and like what were some of the instructional strategies that we used in class that you'd like to take to your classroom, your future classroom. They think about some of the most significant, what I call LOLs, which are lines of learning, which is their summary statement at the end of each class that they do in their notebooks. And so they were able to really start talking about those ideas. They captured that kind of in some group discussion, but it's actually going to support them on their final project where they are reflecting on those ideas. So going back to that question and having them think about now, how would I answer that, has been a nice way for us to wrap up our thinking and then to see how we plan to move forward with that.
Beth, I love that you've kind of boiled down a lot of the essence in your class in this really powerfully phrased question, and that you've kind of, let them know throughout the semester you're building a wonderful answer to this question. I think that's a really cool thing. And one of the things that both you and Andy have kind of talked about is in that first part of your semester, you talk about this is what we're going to learn. And then at the end, in that last class or that last week, you're following through on that promise, right? You're saying, hey, we did learn these kinds of things. So I love that you're both are doing that. What else are people doing?
I would say development lends itself well here because child and adolescent development, we're ending on adolescence, which most of them still are technically from the developmental standpoint. And so we just spent a whole day yesterday talking about identity and identity formation. And some of them have already been in my office like, I didn't have words for that. Like, I didn't know how to explain why I didn't feel like an adult yet, but not an adolescent. So we're ending on kind of where they are, and giving them that reflection piece that I think they will now take with them. Like, I'm giving them that language, hopefully, to be able to say, oh, like my next so many years, right, as I explore, I can just literally take this information and figure out myself. So that has I think will go with them nicely as we're ending talking about them.
So Natalie, one of the things that you're doing, which I think is amazing, is you've actually structured your class to end on something that they're going to find interesting.
Yes.
I think sometimes when people structure their classes, they don't necessarily volitionally do that. That we're going to end with some really cool stuff. And I absolutely recommend that because I need myself sometimes something to inspire me, to engage me. So knowing that I have some of my favorite topics coming up at the end is helpful. So for instance, when I teach general psychology, my last topic is social psych, which is what I do. It's the last topic, it's like the 15th topic. And I save it for that so that I can kind of have that energy and that excitement at the end for myself and as well as potentially for them. And for some of you grad students out there who might not know this, you don't always have to teach the chapters in order if you're using the textbook. You can mix those up if you want, to kind of, end with something at the highlight. But I think sometimes we're not as intentional about doing that. And I love that you're kind of blowing minds in that last week, Natalie.
I love it too, because now I've taught so long. I'm like waiting to see if anyone's still impressed with the fact that I know that they don't have their lives figured out and that nobody else around them does either. But every time they're like, what? I'm like, okay, well, that's sad. We haven't taught you that previously, but then to get to end on it is really exciting.
So you inspire the existential crisis and then just say good luck with that.
Yeah, but then I quickly say you'll get like
Oh no, I'm just joking with you.
Yeah, there's cycles we're gonna go through, but yeah, I do leave them because it's not lifespan, so I don't get to continue on their journey. I'm like, and goodbye. That class, they also virtually raised their own child, and so their child just became 18. And so many of them are like, my child is about ready to leave. And they lose that connection. So it's also kind of their last questions. They're very reflective about what did this program teach you? How could you use this going forward? So they have that kind of, they've been raising this virtual kid to give them a new perspective of development. And then they have questions there to reflect forward. So hopefully they're thinking.
So did you say there's a program that does this? Could you talk about that for a couple seconds? Because this sounds amazing.
Absolutely. So my virtual child through Pearson, I use it every time I cannot bring in real world examples to the classroom for child development, but students love it. So in the very beginning, they fill out questionnaires about themselves, their own personality assessments. They also get to choose if they have a partner, who their partner is, like in this virtual world. And so they kind of set those parameters. And then a child is born and they have chosen to, if it's biological or adopted or whatever, this child is born and then they make decisions about that child for the whole semester, and they're multiple choice. So they're forced into something, but different life events will pop up for different students at different times. So some of them who chose marriage will get divorced, or they'll have another child really quickly. And so those life events pop in and they realize they can't control everything that their child experiences. And then they reflect on they answer questions about their child coupled with class content every so often throughout the semester.
So how do they, like, not in the assignment, but how do their kids do? Like, do they typically flourish, I guess, or?
Some do. Some currently have teenagers who are rebelling and getting tattoos and don't want to go to college or, whatever. So they have to respond to that child. And the child is kind of the equivalent of how you parented them a little bit. But I also tell them in the beginning, they can choose their parenting. Like, you could do something you think you want to do as a parent, you could go do the opposite, you could do what your parents do, the opposite of them. So I kind of give them the freedom that there's no right, I'm not grading them on their parenting, on their application of class material to their child.
So is this like a game you could play like in an afternoon? Like if you were to like do this from the beginning to end?
So beginning to end, it takes 8 hours.
Okay.
To birth and raise your child to 18 takes 8 hours if you sit down and do it without answering questions.
No, that is fantastic. I love that you're doing that. So that might be hard to top, but what else are people doing kind of at the end of the semester to have that information go beyond the semester?
So I'm teaching a 1-credit class, which feels like I haven't had time this semester to get to anything and everything that we want to do. But right before, so my class is reading old stuff. We're up in the archives. We're reading literally old stuff, going through archival collections. And so right before Thanksgiving, they had group presentations, and the assignment was you have to present about this collection as if you were going home for Thanksgiving and telling your family what you did this semester. Kind of thing. And they could only do it in 5 minutes because nobody wants to listen to your research for longer than 5 minutes. And so because I still had some learning I wanted to do this Friday, we're going to be playing with another collection again. And so it's not like a well-planned thing, but my hope is that we're going to kind of leave in the middle of a discussion so that they still might have questions and be thinking about the stuff that they played with in the collection, and they still have that activity. So I'm hoping as they, go through break, they'll still be thinking about the stuff that they've done, and it'll stick with them that way, because we haven't actually, it's like a mystery novel where you haven't quite gotten to the end yet. There's still questions that could be answered. We'll see if that works, but that's how I'm taking advantage of the fact that it's a 1-credit. And I'm like, there's so much we could do.
Yeah, for those of you who taught 1-credit classes, it's amazing how fast they go. This was the connections classes in the CAT communities. When Greg had started these, I think he tried to tell me, you're not going to be able to cover as much as you think. And I didn't listen for like 4 years. And then I kind of developed the rhythm that I needed for that class. But it is amazing how much you can't do. And that's why the choices that you make are just so important for the time that you do have with your students. Well, that is fantastic. I'm very excited that all of your students had all of you as teachers and have all these kind of wonderful experiences and doing really, really cool things. And Natalie, we're going to talk more about that child program at some point, because that sounds really cool. I do want to ask, because this is a point I think it's important that we do that, is if people are comfortable, I would love to hear you share a teaching win this semester, because I think sometimes at this point, like I said, limping to the finish line, we're fatigued. I call this the grumpy time, right? But kind of reflecting back, I think I hope a lot of us do this after the semester, but I think there's value kind of in that moment when you kind of most need the pick me up. about what is something that's been a teaching win for you this semester. And you can say it out loud, you can drop it in the chat. But I'd love you to kind of think about something that went well.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Melissa. How are you?
Good, good. It's nice to see you all. Sorry I was late. I teach until 12:20. So
We're glad you're here.
one of my more recent wins is that I have a student in my CAT community who I have seen myself have a hard time fitting in and belonging, and she's written about not fitting in and belonging racially. And the other day I had written a comment on one of her essays, and a personal essay, and she wrote back and thanked me for helping her feel like she belongs. So it was really nice to know that a student that I've seen struggle with this and has written about it, at least for my part, felt like I helped her feel like she belongs here. So that's a really big win for me.
Melissa, I'm so glad that you did that. I think that's so important. I think I'm stealing a research finding that Greg had shared me a long time ago, is that for students to succeed, oftentimes they kind of have this anecdotal experience that one of their professors believed in them. And it's really kind of important. I would like all of us to believe in them, but I'm so glad that you provided a welcome and inclusive environment for your student. Thank you. Who else has a win they'd like to share?
So mine's not a teaching win because I'm not currently teaching, but I'm surviving my first semester of the PhD program. So that's my win.
That is a big win, Ted. That is awesome.
I think my win might be, oh, sorry, Andy. I've been trying to do like the whole, like I give my students due dates, but if they don't meet them, we have a late assignment policy, but I haven't followed it all semester. So when they need to turn in stuff late, I've just been like, fine, if you can get it done, I'll give you another week, just get it done. I finally am not annoyed or stressed by doing that. I'm just like, whatever, if that's what you need, I'm gonna like do it and I'll let it go. And like, it's a huge emotional burden off of my back now. So that was good.
That's fantastic. And I appreciate your empathy and your students with that. One of the things I've really kind of taken away from the pandemic is that in a large number of cases, those due dates are completely arbitrary. So I've found it much easier to take late work than I ever have. Jack says in the chat, getting explicit positive feedback from one student regarding how my individual professor-student interaction has benefited her learning. That is awesome that we're getting this feedback from our students, that we were there for them. And sometimes your students feel that they just don't have opportunity or thought to say it. So understand that when one student is saying that, it's probably something 10, 15, 20 other students in your class would also say. Andy, you're going to say something before.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to respond to Clarissa, what she just said, because I also felt that I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Late
We were talking
assignment.
about turning in late assignments.
Yes, thank you. Like, what was the thing I was just gonna say? Oh, the late assignments, I've been explicit with my students now that I'm like, if it's a preparation assignment for class, those due dates are firm. Unless there's some extreme case, like I'll be a little bit flexible, but those dates are firm because I need you to be prepared for class so that we can have a good discussion, so that we can engage. And they're not worth very much, as all the big assignments, everything has an ish on it. It's like, this is due Friday-ish. Like, I'm giving you a goal. You want it to be done around this time. Like, just, if it doesn't get done Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I don't know. Like, if it's going to be more than like a couple of days late, if something's going on, like, just let me know that you haven't forgotten about it, or, reach out. And it's been great. Like, students, it's not a big deal. Students are happy about it. So that's been great. The other big thing that I've had, my teaching win, is that I had yesterday, my last class for my grad course. And they were just like, I actually feel empowered to like talk about my teaching, to be able to go out, like they feel like they've really professionalized this semester, which is going back to like course design. That's how I set it up, is that it's really front loaded, and we end with professionalization, talking about how you communicate your teaching, what's important about it, like taking everything that we've learned and then like bringing it all together to how you express it. And the number of comments they got about how they feel so much more confident about what they're doing now was just exactly what I needed to get through the end of the semester.
I love that, Andy. That's fantastic.
So I actually have a question to throw out, because I also did the due dates aren't, set in stone. And I actually, with the class, we decided that this Friday midnight is when everything has to be turned in. I am also secretly terrified that some students are going to not turn in stuff and not get it in. So how are other people handling that, where it's like, oh my God, it now actually is due, catch in on
I
it?
will say I've had and some people have probably heard me share this story before, is this past spring, in one of my classes, I was one of the first times in an undergraduate class I really kind of formalized this informal late policy, ironically, right? And what I found is that most of my students were completely, totally fine, right? They might miss a couple of days, maybe get a week behind, but they made their stuff up. We had kind of a real for real due date, kind of like you're describing, and all but one did the stuff. And this one had just dug such a hole, she had to get like a retroactive withdrawal because she could not come back from it. And it was a very high performing, high achieving student, like, has won all the awards in my department, those kind of things. And I was like, what happened? And she said, yours is the only class that I could put off. Everyone else had the due dates I could not put off. So I did your work last. And then I ended up not doing it. And the kind of one kind of negative I see on this is when you're the only one who is doing something like this, sometimes that lets students kind of dig these holes. So I would say that I would find it probably unlikely that the majority of your students are going to have issue with this. I think most of them get that in, but there could be, one or two of these examples where all the other stuff had to get done. So it did, your stuff kind of didn't. So that's the only thing that kind of gives me a little bit of pause on this and the only kind of negative experience that I've had, but most of my students respected the final due date.
I have one recommendation for that, which doesn't work for every class, but if you can, one of the things that I do when I can in different courses is to have the assignments build on each other. And so it makes it like a natural, like, oh, I have to get this one done before the next one, because if I don't, then I can't successfully engage in the next opportunity. And so creating, when I can, assignments that build on each other and where it's really important for students to get feedback from the first one before they start on the second one can be a big help in making sure that students don't fall too far behind, because then they go, oh, here comes assignment 2 and I still haven't even turned in assignment 1. I better get assignment 1 in. And so that I think can help a lot to avoid that. And again, it's not always possible depending on how the course structure is. Sometimes the assignments don't connect neatly to each other. But when you can, it helps a lot.
And the thing I like about that too is that you might then actually build some momentum as you're kind of moving through those scaffolding assignments. That's pretty cool. I like that, Andy. Any other teaching wins that people would like to share from their semester?
So I'm going to kind of piggyback off of a couple of these already. So so today was one of our last classes with one of my blocks, and we were, as I had mentioned earlier, we were kind of reflecting on the semester, and one of the students spoke up and said, she said, I think I can speak for the rest of the class in that we appreciated how all of your assignments had a purpose to them. Like we were doing them for some specific reason. And you always made sure that we understood why we were doing them. And they never felt like busy work. And so like that to me was right. I mean, like that was a huge thing for me, because I often wonder, I don't assign as much outside of class work as some of my colleagues in the block that they're in. And so I'm always wondering, like, am I on the right track? Like, am I doing too little, or, like, et cetera. And so for me, I'd rather them do things that have purpose and meaning and be relevant to what we're doing and what they need to know, rather than just giving them something to stay busy, because I feel the need for them to have something to do every time. Right. So, so definitely that was a huge win to hear today. And then another student piggybacked off of that and said that I gave them a sense of belonging like that I created that sense for them that they belonged and that they were cared for. And that's why they wanted to be in class. And so again, like it's hearing those things, like you're always questioning what you're doing and are you doing the right thing, so it's those things that definitely, those were wins. Those felt like wins today.
Those are fantastic. I love that you're providing that belongingness, that community, that connection. I think it was in one of the PD events earlier this semester where it was connection before content was something that one of the people had said, and I think that's one of those things that has resonated with me. Another line, I'm quoting Greg for I think the fourth time today with him sitting right there, but good teachers teach content and great teachers teach people. And it's really good to hear how many of you are teaching people, and that is just an amazing thing that you're doing. I'll say too, the whys that you've kind of made explicit, something that's important to me. One of the things I'll sometimes do is I'll have my students tell me why I had them do something. Oftentimes their answers are better than mine. And it's kind of neat that they find that personal relevance that I didn't even necessarily anticipate for why I would have them do that thing. I'll interject my win because it kind of dovetails from that comment. My win this semester is seeing what my students are producing. In my college teaching classes, we just get done their teaching demos. So they actually then, tore out a portion of the class. It was amazing to see how many things we learned about this semester, how many things we talked about together showed up in their actual teaching practices. And now as they're developing their final projects and their visual teaching philosophies and all of these, seeing how they're kind of taking and personalizing that content in ways that are going to be professionally meaningful for them moving forward has been really gratifying. And Noah, you've seen it too. I think it's been an amazing cohort at demonstrating their learning, and we're going to take that as a win. So that was good for us.
Bouncing kind of off of that, Dawn, I say my teaching win for the semester is tomorrow will be my last class teaching of my first semester of teaching. And I'm super excited. I was very nervous about this, but I've loved almost every minute of it. It's been an amazing experience. And I kind of had a full circle moment yesterday thinking, 6 years ago, I was sitting in those seats as a first year student in general psychology. And now I'm up here disseminating all this knowledge to you now, and it's just been a very gratifying, fulfilling experience.
And I'm glad it's been so fulfilling for you. You've done an amazing job by all accounts, and that is awesome.
So I did something I haven't done before. In my professional business writing class, I've got juniors and seniors majoring in a business related field, and they give their presentations at the end of the semester, which is great because then class is planned, but I do really have to concentrate and give a lot of feedback. But I had them give each other feedback, and I had them do it on discussion boards so that they can see that feedback immediately and see what everybody else says, but they have to post first. And they talk about, two things they did well, one suggestion for improvement. And then I added, what is one thing you appreciate about this person as a fellow student? Because they're classes of 18, they've really gotten to know each other. And I gave them an example of something they could say, but they do so much collaboration in those classes that the community is really, really strong. And so it's been really fun to see what they're saying about each other and I'm like, we just need a boost at this time, at this grumpy time of year. And so it's been really fun to see them just give each other positive feedback about, hey, thanks for making this class fun. I enjoy talking to you, or that kind of a thing.
I love that. And those moments are so important. I think we sometimes, as teachers and as colleagues, we focus on the things that could be improved and not so much on the things that are going great. So I love that. Any other wins that people would like to share?
I would say just that my 100-person class, they're still coming to class. Like I haven't seen the huge drop off that you normally see. Those seats are still full and they're still talking. So I'm like, I don't know if that's all a teaching win for me, but I'm so thrilled that they're still there because I keep seeing, I get it at the end of the semester, diminished enrollment, but this class, they are there and they are still talking. So I agree with you. I'm focused on the one class that's not going as well. Like, how are we going to improve? What are we going to do next time? So to take a moment and think, wait, what are the good things? This is a nice moment there. Think about this positive.
I had the
That
same
is
the other
awesome.
day, Natalie, because this week in my undergrad class that I said they've been really quiet and just like seemingly not like particularly engaged. But this week I'm like, there's no homework assignments. We're just going to be like talking about the expectations for like the final things that you're going to be turning in. And I was shocked to walk into class yesterday and have every single student be there on time, ready to go. I was like, I mean, like, this is okay, great. Like, we're not doing anything new. We're just like kind of like hanging out, wrapping up. Like I told them that. I expected a whole bunch of students to be like, it's not worth my time. The fact that they were all there, I was like, cool. All right, something's going right.
So is there anything that anyone tried this semester that they'd never done before, kind of experimental, and it went really well that they'd like to share?
I'll jump in.
Sure.
Earlier this semester, I taught my first completely online course. It was a 5-week course at the beginning, and I created a video for each day's lecture, and really tried to put a lot of effort into producing that at a higher level, and got some really positive feedback from my students about the course. So
That's fantastic. And it sounds like you will have set up kind of a foundation for moving forward. That's great.
that's the whole goal. And I'm actually going back. I'm in the process now of going back and kind of refining a lot of those videos and polishing them up to make them a little bit more quality.
One thing I'll say from my own experience, and people can weigh in otherwise if they think differently or want to add to it, is I don't think the videos ever have to be perfect. If you've seen the videos we've put out, they're definitely not perfect. And when I do them for class, they're not perfect either. So I just give yourself some grace too about when you can stop refining.
I get that, but I'm teaching a video production class, so I feel
Okay,
like we have to be
that's
pretty good.
Unless you
you can
set it up as
disregard my
they give you
comments then.
feedback. You could have them comment on the things that they would improve for their own video production, and then you don't have to change anything.
Yep, great idea, Sarah.
Awesome. Any other experimental things that people have tried?
I actually ran an experiment in my class for a journal article, and it went super well, like way better than normal. So they talked about, so this journal has a call for articles about teaching social class in business schools. And so I tried to teach social class to one of my classes, and then the control group was, we were talking about stereotypes around people who have non-native English accents when they speak. And both topics, the students were super into. Like, we didn't even get through the whole experiment. I was like, oh, we got to cut it off, you guys, class is done, because they wanted to keep talking about these stereotypes they have, because it's like something they hadn't talked about before, but then realized they had lots and lots of ideas about the topics we were talking about. So I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate that into my next class, because next semester I'm teaching a different class. But I might do something like that where it's knowledge that they just didn't realize they had. And once they sort of got the spark, they were kind of into talking more about it and realizing I actually know way more about this, or at least have thoughts about this that I had never consciously thought about before.
That is fantastic. When do you submit the article?
It's due December 31st, but I don't know if we're going to get it done because my co-author has 9 interviews in the meantime with candidates at her school. So we'll see if we can get it done. If we can't, we're going to try to publish it in another journal, but we might try the experiment again then next semester since we'll still have time. So it should be fun. I'm excited. I would be excited to do it with my class next semester, especially because I have some students from this semester that are going to be in my classes next semester to see how it changes the dynamic.
Well, Clarissa, you may have just earned yourself an invitation to present in the PD series. So we're gonna follow up on that. That sounds fantastic. Any
I'll
other
do it. It'll be
experimental work out there?
interesting.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I just said it'll be interesting if I'll do it. It'll be interesting because I would love to have people talk more about these kinds of topics. I know you teach this stuff, Dawn. So, but I feel like diversity topics can be incorporated in every class. And if this is the way we do it, go at it. I mean,
I absolutely love that. I love that. We're going to be in contact. Noah, Ashley, put it down. We're going to email you real soon.
Please and thank you.
Oh yeah, that too. That too.
I'm just gonna do that every time, Dawn, just a heads up.
I get excited. I forget the common courtesy sometimes. Any other experimentation that went well this semester or didn't go well? I mean, we can discuss that too.
I have a silly one that I've been doing this semester just to start off class is I've started trying to think about how students can get talking without worrying about the right answers and like really encouraging just like creativity and spewing out ideas. So I started by doing like a wrong answers only thing in class to start out. And so I'd be like, okay, like, what is this? Wrong answers only. You know, what is the moon made of? Wrong answers only. And then I just kept going with that. Like, you know, what kind of uses, non-conventional uses can you think of for like what to do with a potato? Or like giving them like a weird scene, like an not Alfred Molina. I can't remember the artist's name, but like a weird scene and then be like, how did this come to be? Like what happened here? And just letting the first like 2 or 3 minutes of class be like students talking about like something weird where there's no right answer. Sometimes encouraging them that it has to be a wrong answer, or just things like that. Like I've been starting class that way and the students are really into it, or like asking them what kinds of superpowers they would have if they could have any kind of superpower, just like things like this. It's been a really fun way to get class started.
I love that. I think I had seen, or maybe you even said like the wrong answers only, what's the moon made of? And then someone said cheese and the response was, I thought you said wrong answers.
Yeah, exactly. Like 3 students were like wrong answers only.
Yeah.
And I was like, these students are my people. So yeah, I think that trying to like finding space in class to encourage wrong answers, if you can do it, I highly recommend it. I think it's a fun way to get students the juices flowing, that creativity out there, and to get them feeling like they can talk without having to have the right answer.
That is fantastic. The last question I kind of have, and if you've got to go, you can go. I understand this is a busy time of year. It's great to see all of you for as long as we could. I just wanted us to kind of think about, all right, we got a break coming up, and for some of us it's shorter, some of us it's longer. What's one thing you're going to do to kind of recharge and reward yourself from this experience?
I've got a novel reading planned, but
I love that. Nice. What about the rest of you?
Kind of branching off of that, I've got a whole bunch of comics on my shelf that I haven't touched since I bought them. I'm absolutely going to start hammering those out.
Nice. One of the things that I'm going to do, I've done this the last couple of years and I'll probably keep doing it for a while because I like it, is A Christmas Carol is actually a pretty short read. And what I've done the last couple of years is read it on the couch next to the Christmas tree. And that's kind of a cool thing that I've kind of done to remove myself from work and get into the holiday season that my family celebrates a little bit.
I've started doing pottery, and they have open studio nights at the Manhattan Art Center. And so a friend encouraged me to keep going to open studio after my class ended. And pottery is really fun because if you completely destroy it, you get to reuse the clay. And so I don't feel like I'm wasting anything. And it's very common to just have everything go schmoosh, which almost everything does. But you get to play with mud, essentially.
Awesome. What kind of things do you make?
Sorry, I make a lot of shallow dishes that would be good for like a cat to drink water out of.
Okay.
That seems to be my skill set right now. I have a goal to build higher, but that doesn't work out.
That reminds
There it
me
is.
of the practice of building mandalas out of like sand that are like really intricate and beautiful, and then when you're finished, you just completely destroy them.
Oh yeah, I've gotten like something to exactly the right size. It was perfect. And then when you pull it off, you have to like slice it off with a wire. And then I just like chopped the bottom off. So yeah, you get really used to in pottery failing just constantly.
Nice. So any other self-care reward plans for break?
My daughter's turning 16, so we're taking her back to where she was born, which happens to be Hawaii.
Oh, wow. That sounds fun.
I'm very much
Now-
looking forward to it.
Tangent. My daughter is 13. Is it getting better or worse from here? Because I don't know if it can get worse.
14's rough. It is starting to, it has just started turning back around. I'm like, she's becoming a person again. We hang out and she's like, she seems to like me again. So,
Okay.
yeah, 13, 14 they were rough.
I was hoping you were gonna say 11, 12, they were rough, but.
Yeah, sorry. You might still have another year or so, but yeah, it does end.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Any other things that people would like to share? All right, well, I would like to thank you for being wonderful participants, not only today, but all semester. One of the best things that I get to do here at K-State is to be part of this professional development series. And I really love expanding my teaching community and my networking to all of you. You're all doing wonderful things, and I'm proud to call you my colleagues. So we'll pick this up in the spring. And until then, I hope your semesters end smoothly and you do get to rest and recharge over break. So it was good to see you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.
Happy end of